Hey everybody, how we all doing? Hope you're all having a good day today so far. I'm one more time, and we're here with another edition of the Game Boy-a-Thon, part 3 out of what should theoretically be 128 parts, as we play and sample all 512 games released for the OG Game Boy. Today we got a really good selection of games for y'all today. They're not going to appear very good. I'm not gonna lie. They're gonna be games that you're either had heard of on other consoles or have just never heard of at all. But we actually have a surprising amount to talk about, and I discovered some really, really surprising things with some of these games. So I'm really looking forward to sharing those with you today. I'm just very, very excited about this. I wrote way too many notes, which is always a good thing when you're writing so many notes and whatnot. That you end up with almost like too much to say. It means you probably got something good going on. So really looking forward to it. But of course, hey P-Bug, Worms a can. Worms mentioning that he's having some pasta cooked in tomato sauce with chicken, spinach, and cashews. The cashews is an interesting choice, but that does sound very good. I also have a whiny dog behind me. Oh, a little whiny dog. Oh, it's okay. I apologize. What's wrong, sweetie? Okay, I'm gonna let her out. 1 second. There you go. I was gonna have her hang out with me in here, but I guess she did not want that. So that's fine. That's fine. So, as far as today, we have 4 games to show off. But before we get started, I do want to make a bit of a clarification, specifically with just how I'm selecting games for each episode. So, as I previously mentioned, I select each game by literally putting all 512 Game Boy games into a list and then just hitting randomize, and then just having that be essentially the final list, with some alterations here and there. I've always been upfront that, some games are going to be shuffled around so we don't get like 2 sports games in a row and whatnot. But I've decided to change that up a little bit further because I realized that talking about a game's sequel before the first game in said series is probably not the world's best idea. For instance, if we were to keep going with this, next stream would feature Kirby's Dream Land 2. But it kind of makes sense to talk about the first Kirby's Dream Land before Kirby's Dream Land 2. So in cases like that, we're going to be playing the first game in the series, or at least a game that's earlier in the series in some cases. Depending on when they reach the Game Boy or not. So I wanted to kind of get that out of the way, just so people are aware, I like being as transparent about this as possible. So I guess expect some Kirby's Dream Land next week, which I'm looking forward to. Love that game. Absolutely great. Absolutely great. Though speaking of some great games, let's go ahead and get things set up here and go ahead and get started. Because like I said, got a lot more to talk about than you think. It's actually kind of crazy how much we have to talk about. So just getting my notes all set up here. Very good. So our first game is going to be something that you're probably going to look at and be like, I don't know if there's really much to say about this, but this is actually going to be All-Star Baseball 99. Developed by Real Time Associates and published by Acclaim, specifically under their Acclaim Sports label. Let's go ahead and get that nice and loaded up. Released in 1998. Are you all ready to baseball? Turn that down just a hair bit there. There we go. Yes, good old Game Boy Baseball. This is our first baseball game for the Game Boy that we're going to be playing. There's, I believe, 6 in total. And it's actually very interesting because they're all made by different companies. I don't think there's, I don't think any 2 baseball games are made by the same company or even published by the same company. So that's kind of exciting. If nothing else, because we're going to get everyone's different take on that. It's unlike, say, American football, where we're going to be playing quite a few Madden games. They're all going to be terrible in their own special way. So, All-Star Baseball 99 has actually a pretty impressive suite of features here. Home Run Derby, Exhibition, Season modes, even like batting practice, All-Star modes. I don't believe it has battery backup, hence why there's a password system here. And of course, if you just wanted to jump to the playoffs, you could do that too. So, this is a relatively robust game for the Game Boy, at least as far as Game Boy sports games are concerned. Rather impressive, which is actually kind of befitting All-Star Baseball because of all the franchises, particularly sports franchises that Acclaim had. All-Star Baseball probably was its most impressive. Before we talk about that, let's go ahead and get to an exhibition game. This has the full Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball Players Association's license. So we're going to get Ken Griffey Jr. on the Mariners. And that's who we're going to pick. We're going to play, I don't know, the Pirates. It's for Pirates. Good rendition of, of the national anthem. Very good, very good. But yeah, I mean, you can do everything. You can adjust where your fielders are, which is actually kind of amazing. Like, do you want them to be pulled in or whatnot, or what have you? Like, there's a surprising level of tactics that are here that I honestly would not expect. Like the shift. I think we now officially banned in Major League Baseball. Yeah, it's really, really amazing. Like, the level of nuance is actually in this game, which makes it a little unfortunate that it's not a good game. As you can see, there is an actual. You actually do place where the ball is going to be thrown. The little black bars indicate the strike zone. Also, this is a very strange game where B is to select your options in game. In the menus, it's A, but in the game, it's B, and I have no idea why that is. But yeah, it's an interesting baseball game. I don't think, from what little I've played of it so far, I don't think it's particularly great. But also, as you can see, it kind of runs terribly. Gameplay was not meant to do what's going on here, basically. But you can clearly tell that Real Time Associates tried. They clearly tried to do something here. No real music other than, yeah, as you can see the organ playing and whatnot. So like they got some things going on here, but pitching so far seems relatively random. Like, it's not actually random. Like, if you pitch a fastball, it's going to always go relatively straight and true. Oh, geez. Okay, I mistook the X as where the ball is going to land, and that was incorrect. Yeah, you throw the baseball with the B button. Once again, very... oh. That's a very poor move. You run the same speed as the, You run the same speed as the base runner. Real problem there. Okay, we got him. It was not ending well there. So let's talk a little bit about All-Star Baseball. Now, during the late 90s and early 2000s, Acclaim, as part of their, eventually becoming the largest North American video game publisher, developed a close relationship with Nintendo. Now, this relationship meant that Acclaim and their subsidiaries essentially started developing games exclusively for Nintendo, specifically sports games. There are a few other exclusive titles that came out for Nintendo 64 as well from them, like Extreme G, which I guess you could say is sports. It's a racing game. But particularly like NFL Quarterback Club or I believe their more realistic take on the NBA Jam series, which I think was also still called NBA Jam, and All-Star Baseball all ended up coming out for the Nintendo 64. Now, most of these games... Ooh, we got a base hit. No, we didn't. Well, we tried. Now, most of these games could be charitably described as like all glitz and no glamour. And in a sense that they tended to be very like technically impressive in terms of graphics and frame rate alike. Like a lot of these games would like play in the Nintendo 64's high resolution mode and would run at like 30 to 60 FPS, which is kind of unprecedented for a lot of N64 games at the time. Iguana Entertainment was the primary developer for a lot of these games. They were just really, really good at pushing the Nintendo 64 to its limits, as noted by like such games as like Turok, for instance, Turok the Dinosaur Hunter, a game that was visually impressive for its time. Not doing too bad, getting some hits here. I'm doing a lot better than my test run earlier today. Now, what these games rather lacked in like gameplay or features when compared to the competitors, they still at least like tried to make up for the graphics and whatnot, but that tended to mean that games like Madden that also came out for the Nintendo 64 tended to outshine them, get better critical reviews, and eventually just start selling better. Now, there was one game that was an arguable exception, and that was All-Star Baseball, at least when it eventually came to the Nintendo 64. All-Star Baseball is probably the best reviewed sports franchise Acclaim ever released, with the N64 versions often having it in Metacritic in like the high 80s, or game rankings actually, my apologies. Game rankings in the high 80s. Magazines such as like Electronic Gaming Monthly would, how do I advance runners? That's how you advance runners. Oh, they advance really, really slowly. Oh, well, everyone's safe. It's okay. Now, this wasn't just due to the games looking nice. As you can probably tell from the Game Boy version, they actually tended to have some really robust features. They tended to have, even on the N64, more options and finer control than the competitors. Like, baseball games in this era, I tended to not like them an awful lot because of the fact that, well, to be frank, it always felt like it was very random whether or not like I would strike a player out or get a decent hit on the ball and put it into play. It's something that's sort of had to be done because baseball is a game of failure. Most people don't get on base. Like a good average is getting on base 300, like was it 30% of the time? Like that, you're considered a good baseball player if you do that, which it's kind of abysmal when you think about it. So All-Star Baseball having finer controls and making it feel like you are more in control of your destiny really went a long way. Now, you combine that with the fact that there really wasn't much competition on the Nintendo 64. Like, there was games like, was it like Mike Piazza's Strike Zone or whatever it was called, among other games. I don't even think EA had a baseball game that was out for the Nintendo 64. Oh, that one hopped. Oh, okay. I thought it was knocked up. Yeah, so it didn't. Again, it really helped them that they really didn't have a whole lot of competition. But despite that, it probably still was a bit of a surprise that it ended up doing as well as it did and was as good as it was. Because if you know anything about the history of All-Star Baseball, it's kind of a miracle this was any good. Oh, am I going to get that out? Nope, I'm not. Should have gone to second base first. Oh, well. So the series first got its start on the 16-bit consoles, so the Super Nintendo and Genesis, with a little game called Frank Thomas Big Hurt Baseball. Now, good old Frank Thomas Big Hurt Baseball was cool in the sense of while it played terribly, they made the smart decision to do the Mortal Kombat method and have digitized actors. We're in this situation again. Digitized actors basically, doing the batting animations and the like. And so, essentially, what digitized actors, for those of you who are not aware of what Mortal Kombat did, is, the sprites, like the players that are running around on the screen here, what if instead of, like, hand-drawing those, you essentially just took pictures of, like, real-life objects or people, and you essentially scanned them into the game, and made sprites out of them using, like, frames of animation from video, more or less. This worked out really well for Mortal Kombat, and to be fair, it worked out well for Frank Thomas Baseball, because it did look very nice. Now, it also played terribly. It was an absolutely terrible game. I do not recommend it at all. When it was ported to the Saturn and PlayStation in 1990s... Oh, how did I not get hit? Ah, man, that sucks. Oh, well. Yeah, so when it got ported to the Saturn and PlayStation in 1996, while the animations were better, it kind of sort of played worse somehow. And it got terrible reviews, as one would expect. So, the following year, they came out with the first game in the All-Star Baseball branding. All-Star Baseball 99 featuring Frank Thomas. It came out for the PlayStation again. And it essentially was just Frank Thomas Big Herd Baseball, but slightly prettier. Got terrible reviews, and everyone basically hated it. So, it became clear to Acclaim that they had to retool it. And this was around the time that they started their pretty good, lucrative relationship with Nintendo. So they took a year off, and in 1998, they came out with All-Star Baseball 99. Very strange thing in sports games, by the way, where the year on the title is usually 1 year later, and that's usually because seasons are played over multiple years. Essentially, it'll start like in the fall and end in the spring. Except baseball, which takes place over the same calendar year, so I don't know why they decided to call it All-Star Baseball 99. Acclaim's weird. Point is, though, is that they came out for it, first for the Nintendo 64, and then, of course, the Game Boy version that we're playing now. And it was a huge hit. Reviewers loved it. It scored incredibly well. EGM, I think, gave it just short of a gold rating. I think it scored an average of 8.75 out of 10. WordZap noted that said, yeah, market research shows that if you don't do that, it sells worse because people think it's outdated. That does make total sense. I could totally see that. So yeah, like, it ended up doing incredibly well for them. And as somebody who's personally played the N64 version of All-Star Baseball 99, I can totally agree with that. It's a great game. It's probably the best well, either that or its sequel, All-Star Baseball 2000, are probably the best baseball games for the Nintendo 64. Granted, once again, not much competition, but you know, it's a good game. It's a good game. Now, magazine, once again, now it ended up coming out with the sequel next year, All-Star Baseball 2000, with magazines such as GamePro giving it near perfect scores. I think it has a game rankings average of like 88%. So did extremely well for them. And it's a series that's going to last up until the PlayStation 2 era. I believe the final game is going to be All-Star Baseball 2005. And it's really going to end less because the series got bad or stopped selling well, as much as Acclaim eventually just stopped being a thing. We're going to talk more about the history of Acclaim when we get to some of their other titles, because we're going to have to... Acclaim put out a lot of video games on the Game Boy, like in a ridiculous amount. So we'll save their story for another time. So talking a little bit more about All-Star Baseball 99 in particular, much like most sports games, they do have a cover athlete. Now, I was debating whether or not it's really relevant to talk about the cover athlete of various games, particularly since, you know, it's not really that much in relation to the video game or whatnot. But I kind of wanted to talk about the person who was on the cover of All-Star Baseball 99, because he has kind of an interesting history behind him. So the man who's on the cover is Larry Walker, then a right fielder for the Colorado Rockies in the National League of Major League Baseball. Now, at the time, he was a known power hitter and also Canadian, who grew up in British Columbia, in the greater Vancouver area, from what I understand. And what's interesting about him is that baseball, while there are baseball teams in Canada, at the time there were two teams, now only just one, the Toronto Blue Jays. He ended up, you didn't really think about baseball as being a career for him. Instead, his big thing is that he wanted to be a goaltender in the National Hockey League, or at least just play hockey professionally in general. Now, he tried out for some various amateur teams and whatnot, and just didn't really quite work out. And over the summer, like in between these like tryouts and whatnot, he would play like a couple games of baseball here and there. So, in his own recollection, when it comes to his history of playing baseball before getting to the major leagues, he basically said that, yeah, he only played games like every once in a while, and that he honestly had no idea what the rules of baseball were. He just knew hit ball, get on base. But he was convinced by a few people, hey, let's go ahead and try out for the Montreal Expos. So he went to one of the Montreal Expos training camps in 1985, and he was absolutely terrible. As you'd imagine, somebody who never really played all that much baseball, he wasn't very good. At all. But, there was enough people there who saw that he had potential. Because one, he was a very athletic guy. And two, he was very much willing to learn from his mistakes, and he showed it very early on. So the Expos decided to take a chance on him, and they sent him to one of their minor league teams, specifically one of their Short A teams. Now, Short A is basically, there are three classifications of minor league baseball: Triple A, which is kind of the highest level, Double A, and Single A. And then there's Short A, which is basically like the most development of development players. They literally only play like 20 games a season. And he went down there to learn, and it turns out the team he played for was the Utica Blue Sox in New York. Now, it turns out he was terrible there as well. But once again, he showed some promise. He was willing to learn, and so people just kept giving him shots, and he slowly started moving his way up through the minor leagues, slowly but surely. And eventually, in 1989, he was doing well enough that the Expos called him up to a major league roster. So 1989, I should have threw to first base, got that double play. Oh well. So yeah, 1989, he makes his debut for the Montreal Expos, and he does great. It turns out he's a really good baseball player, and he plays for them up through 1994. 1994, free agency hits, and he decides he's going to take his talents to another team. He gets a lot of really lucrative offers, and he decides to sign a $22.5 million contract with the Colorado Rockies, probably the team he's best known for. This is awful. Well, this game's going to be tied. So, signs with the Rockies, and he goes to play in Colorado. Now, this proved to be a great move for him, as the ideal hitting conditions at Coors Field, the home of the Rockies, fit his style perfectly. It was known as a very good hitter's park. You could hit a ton of home runs there. And given his batting style and whatnot, the right field fence, if I remember correctly, was also just much shorter than like the left field fence, as in it was like closer to the field. So because of that, it meant he hit a lot of home runs. And he would start winning batting titles, being like the best batter, most offensive production, essentially, in league. He would win those like multiple times. And eventually he won the National League Most Valuable Player in 1997. Now, while he would never be part of a championship-winning team, he did eventually get elected in both the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. So, needless to say, impressive guy. It's hard to say that he wasn't, very, very good player. Seems like a good guy overall, too. I've never really heard anything particularly bad about him. And yeah, seemed like he was the perfect person to put on the cover. 127 Crazy says, multi-sports athletes are interesting to me. I love Charlie Ward, who is a Knicks and also NFL player. Yeah, Charlie Ward was a fantastic player. He won the Heisman Trophy as the best college football player. But he was such a good basketball athlete that he also got drafted in the National Basketball Association. And he actually chose to play in the NBA and had a great career actually. He wasn't quite a Hall of Famer, but he was a solid piece on many a team. Yeah, fantastic guy. So we're only going to play a little bit more of this because let's be honest, it's baseball. It's barely interesting to play, much less watch. And the only baseball games I really want to play are either Ken Griffey or RBI Baseball, and this is neither of them. So let's just play just maybe a little bit more of it, kind of continue to comment on it, and then we'll perhaps move on to our next game. So once again, this game does have auto-fielding, as in the computer will try to field for you. So far, I'm finding that that's just kind of screwing me over sometimes, particularly on that one play where 2 runs were scored by Pittsburgh. And my players just decided not to cut off the ball. They decided to run past the ball, then turn around and follow it all the way into the outfield. Yeah, it turns out that's not a great way to play baseball. And I'll say the hitting is not as bad as I thought it was. When I did my first test play earlier today to make sure this game was even working, I was not able to hit a single thing. And that was fully paying attention and not, paying attention to my notes or anything like that. Here I'm having a much easier time. So this seems like a perfectly serviceable baseball game. I think earlier today, I would have told you this game was terrible. Now, I think it's actually pretty all right. Like, I think if you wanted a good baseball game for the Game Boy, this might be it. Even though when the ball gets put into play, it is very, very slow. 127 Crazy says, the frame rate doesn't look slug awful like I'd expect from a Game Boy baseball game. Yeah, like, it's not great, certainly. Like, particularly if, like, more than 3 players are on screen at once. But it could certainly be worse. There are definitely some weird animations, like when a player's out, they just disappear. Like, there's definitely feels like there's some, like, corners cut here, but Real-Time Associates seems like they did a pretty good job. We're also not going to be talking about the developer, Real-Time Associates here. They did quite a few Game Boy games. And they have a fantastically interesting history. They were, just to give you, like, a bit of a preview, they were at one point maybe the most important Sega Saturn developer. Which, that's not great, to say that much. In fact, you know what? Why don't we go ahead and move on? I think we've seen everything we need to see. And the next game we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about it a lot. We got a lot to say. It's Bubsy II, everybody. Hey, Bubsy is back! In an all-new, exciting adventure. I hope you're ready for some of the worst music on the Game Boy. You ever wonder what it's like if somebody murdered a Game Boy and you wanted to hear its death screams? Bubsy 2 is gonna let you know. Worms a Can says, where's Bubsy 1? Well, the answer is not on the Game Boy. The only Bubsy game that came out for the Game Boy was Bubsy 2. Worms a Can also says, wow, we're playing Bubsy 2, Mega Man 2? Not quite, but I don't blame him for thinking it. 127 Crazy says, most important Sega Saturn developer would be awkwardly shoehorned into the miscellaneous skills section of my resume. I bet. J-Spot, thank you so much for the resub. I do appreciate that. And what could possibly go wrong? Well, first off, this music's terrible, but they give you the option to just straight up turn it off. Which is very good. We're gonna leave it on, though, because you need the full experience. You can also select which floor you want to start on, which is nice. It's basically giving you the option to select what, like, give you a level selected, essentially, in a way, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, Bubsy 2 was developed by Images Software Limited and published by Accolade. We're gonna go ahead and just do Grand Tour. And get on that first floor. The Bubsy 2 is interesting from Bubsy 1 in the sense that you are given the option to start in a world. Select which one you wanted to do first. We'll go ahead and do this one. Did we hit up? We hit up! Music's a little bit better here, thankfully. Hey, King of Denial! Like, Denial. Look at that pun, isn't it great? So, boy, where do you even begin with Bubsy? Oh, by the way, this is another game that for some reason, B is to jump, and A is to, like, use your weapons and whatnot. Oops, I accidentally had the exit hole, so we left. Alright, well, let's go back. Yeah, so it's hard to even start where to begin with Bubsy, so I think start with Bubsy. We should start by talking about the very beginning, everybody. Just go right to the start. So, today I think Bubsy's best... Bubsy? Good old Bubsy. Don't you love Bubsy? Today I think Bubsy is best known as being a weird, obnoxious ripoff of Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog. Like, I think that's a very charitable thing to say. You know? Like, an attempt to, like, at best, emulate the character, just, like, at worst, straight up rip him off, you know? That's just basically the Bubsy thing. But the history of Bubsy is a little bit more complicated than that. Oh, this is a maze-like level. God, I hate these types of levels. Why would he... Oh, it's a secret wall. Oh, okay, cool. I was about to say, why would you even have that there? He's more of a Bugs Bunny copy visually, says Worms of Can. Actually, yes, you were quite correct about that, and there's a reason for that. So, we should start by talking about what Bubsy even is. Like, what is the inspirations for Bubsy, and why does he even exist? Also, Bubsy's dead. Goodbye, Bubsy. So, Bubsy, as a character in the series, was conceived by a designer at Accolade by the name of Michael Berlin. So, now, Berlin was a long-time Accolade employee, and he had worked on mostly titles like adventure games, essentially, like Altered Destiny, among others. Because back in the day, in the late 80s, they were known more as like a PC developer, as opposed to a, like, working on the Genesis or whatnot. Crazy says Kirkland Brand, Looney Tunes ass. Yeah, you're not wrong, really. So, the story goes is that Michael Berlin was a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog. And he also was getting tired of making adventure games. And Accolade was looking to start developing for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, kind of spread their wings a little bit after having some success on the PC. So, Berlin came to them with a proposal. Why don't we make a game like Sonic the Hedgehog? Make a platformer. Now, Accolade scoffed at that, and from the way that Michael Berlin talks about it, we're incredibly rude about it, too. Now, they basically told him straight up, and this is a quote from Berlin, quote, "Go back to writing stories, that's all you know." Which, rude. Absolutely rude. I have no idea what killed me there. I'm guessing that mummy, but it didn't seem like it touched the mummy, but whatever, I guess. So, he got this denial, but he decided that he was going to persist. He was going to continue trying. And so, he just kept talking to him about it and kept proposing it, and eventually they're like, fine, if you could write up a treatment explaining why we should make this game, and it's good, we'll go ahead and make it. We'll greenlight it. So, he got to work, and the way the story goes, and it's told a little bit differently depending on the source, he spent somewhere between 10 to 14 hours playing Sonic the Hedgehog every day, until he had enough material to write down and gather his thoughts. Now, his thoughts were essentially that Sonic made great use of the Genesis, of its hardware. The levels were wide open, and they really benefited his movement controls. And in general, he was just kind of a cool character. And, you know, it just seemed like it would be a perfect fit for Accolade. Now, this little document apparently impressed Accolade enough that they went ahead and greenlit the project. So hey, guess what? We're now making Bubsy for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Isn't that great? Bubsy the Bobcat is now born. So what exactly is Bubsy the character? So Bubsy is a humanoid North American bobcat that takes visual inspiration from two sources. His visual inspiration primarily is from 20s cartoons, like Fleischer cartoons and whatnot. A lot of cartoon characters that were all, you know, anthropomorphic animals that wore essentially just like a t-shirt. Hence why Bubsy just wears a t-shirt and kind of looks the way he does. Like, whereas I can't say it's more of a Bugs Bunny copy visually, and yeah, that's not far off. There's a lot of inspiration from those old Merry Melody cartoons that are present all throughout this. We are getting absolutely messed up here, so how about we go to a different level, by the way. There we go. WordZap also says, Bubsy doesn't believe in pants. Very true. So, Bubsy took his visual inspiration from 20s cartoons. He took his personality from Sonic the Hedgehog, the kind of cocky poses, like running super fast and whatnot. The Genesis game and Super Nintendo game as well are very fast games. Like, he runs very fast, as you would expect. Now, what set him apart a little bit from Sonic is that he was a very... Oh no, I forgot B button is the jump. I was trying to hit A to jump. So what set Bubsy a little bit apart from Sonic, though, is he's a very quippy individual. There's actually quite a few voice lines in Bubsy, and Bubsy II for that matter, that were, let's say, obnoxious. And don't take my word for it, the developers of Bubsy II also felt they were incredibly obnoxious. The story goes that, like, when they were developing Bubsy II, they would, like, sarcastically quote them at each other just to annoy each other because they just hated them so much. They had to hear them every day and whatnot. So, you know, needless to say, even the developers already knew that Bubsy was kind of an annoying character. Now, I've never heard anybody actually say they liked Bubsy, besides Michael Berlin, the creator. But you know who apparently did? The people at Accolade, specifically the leadership. Now, this might be a little surprising given their initial reluctance to greenlight Bubsy, but apparently once it did get started and they saw what this game could potentially be, they went nuts. They decided that they were going to come around on this very hard and put so much advertising behind it. And so this was in form of not only like print and TV ads, but also in things like merchandise. There's a lot of Bubsy plush toys that were out. I actually knew somebody who had a Bubsy plush toy when I was a kid. You know, also included posters and like official strategy guides. And I think there was a comic book, I'd like to say. Actually, it might have been just like a coloring book or something like that. The point is, there was a lot of Bubsy merchandise. Now, my personal favorite thing, though, was not only did they have, like, that, but they also had, like, contests and whatnot. But they also had... Oh, boy, this one's good. So, at the 1993 Consumer Electronics Show, they decided to show off Bubsy to journalists there. And how they went about it is that they had a burlap sack that clearly had a person in it, and then they assembled all the journalists around it, and then out of the burlap sack jumped a person in a Bubsy costume. This is what he looked like. This man was hiding in a burlap sack, and they gathered everyone around, and he jumped out and was like, "Hey, I'm Bubsy, look at me, bomb a game! You should write about it, it'll be great!" Incredibly stupid. Incredibly stupid. So, yeah. They did all of that. And, you know what? Actually, I said that was my favorite thing. That's not my favorite thing. My favorite thing is is that they were so in on this, they decided to make it a multimedia project. So, this is actually prior to the release of Bubsy II. But they decided they were going to make an animated pilot. So basically a test run episode that could be picked up by networks for full production. You can find this on the internet. You can find it on YouTube. It's very, very easy to find. And it is maybe the most Poochie the dog thing you could possibly imagine. Full of attitude, just trying to be as extreme as possible sort of sort of TV series that you could ever possibly see. It basically takes place in the American Southwest, involving Bubsy and his nephews, and their friend who's an armadillo, who's afraid of semi-trucks. Oh, I guess we got a game over. That's sad. Well, we can jump right back in. That's not a big deal. Yeah, so it takes place in the American Southwest, and it was directly sponsored by Taco Bell. This was made in production with Taco Bell, which is great. As far as I know, they didn't have, like, Bubsy toys as far as a kids pack or anything like Taco Bell stores. So I don't really know exactly how this worked out, but hey, here you go. So this show is maybe one of the worst things I've seen over the course of 22 minutes. It's not good at all. It's not funny. And we got knocked in the wrong direction. I have no idea how to turn around. Oh, select button. Okay. So yeah. Now the episode of the pilot is Bubsy's catchphrase, by the way. His catchphrase is called "What Could Possibly Go Wrong," which, needless to say, it's a very bad catchphrase to have. You don't want that as your catchphrase. Worms and Can says, still better than the NFT cartoons, I bet. I don't know. I've watched at least one of the NFT cartoons, and I won't say I was entertained, but I was... I didn't have a complete frown on my face. Not an endorsement, let me assure you. So, here's the thing, though. Now, with all this advertising, you know, advertisement costs money, right? It costs a lot of money to promote a video game, especially when you go to the absurd lengths that Accolade was. Which is a real problem when you still need to make a video game. So, Accolade was like, well, how could we cut cost? And they decided on what's honestly just a genius strategy. Because, you see, they still had to print the cartridges, you know, onto, like, Super Nintendo and Genesis cartridges. And to do so cost money, because you have to pay royalty fees to those companies. And Sega, in particular, had a pretty expensive royalty fee. It was $10 per cartridge printed. So every time you print a cartridge, you have to give Sega $10, right? So they decided, well, what if we just not pay that? And we just reverse engineer the copyright protection. What could possibly go wrong? The answer is that they immediately got sued by Sega. So, this didn't seem like a completely bad idea at first, because you see, reverse engineering source code is something you're totally allowed to do. Presuming you do it in like a clean room style. On top of that, you can reverse copyright protection on a console. That's already been proven by Tengen. They were allowed to do that, and they did. So, the problem, though, is that they maybe used some of Sega's code in order to reverse engineer the product. So they didn't, like, clean room it. They didn't do, like, what Compaq did with, like, the IBM BIOS back in the 80s. They just straight up were like, we're just going to use this little bit of code here. So needless to say, they lost the case. Now, on appeal, though, they actually ended up winning on appeal. And the reason why they won on appeal is because they were able to prove that they didn't derive all their profits solely from this code that they technically sort of stole from Sega. And it's because they released a Super Nintendo version. Since the Super Nintendo version came out, they could show that not all their profits were derived from Sega. And so, because of that, the judge sort of like let them off the hook. Now, Sega could have followed this up and appealed that decision, but they instead decided, hey, why don't we just reach an agreement with Accolade where they'll go ahead and develop games for us exclusively, and we'll also like cut them a deal on the licensing fees. And so that's exactly what they did. So Bubsy ended up coming out, and it was a success. Yeah, as Worm said, not all the profits were from this crime. Half of them were from this unrelated crime. Exactly. To be fair, I think they actually did pay the licensing fee to Nintendo, so they just decided not to pay it to Sega for some reason. Yeah, love to get rewarded for breaking the law. Exactly. So Bubsy came out and was a success. Like, it actually did very well. I have no idea where I'm going in this stage, by the way. Absolutely lost. So, it reviewed well, and it usually got roughly about, like, an 80 out of 100% score. Like, or equivalent in various magazines. People were very impressed with the speed that this game moved and whatnot. I personally thought this game sucked. Not this game in particular. Oh, we just glitched into the wall. That's fun. Hope that doesn't screw us over in any way. That did. Great. Fantastic. So, ended up being a big success for them. They earned a lot of money, so they immediately greenlit 2 sequels. Bubsy II, which came out for the Genesis and Super Nintendo in 1994, and Bubsy Fractured Furry Tales, throne-worthy name, for the Atari Jaguar, which, that's a decision. That's not one I would make, but hey, you know, Accolade wanted to make that money. Now, Bubsy 2 ended up getting roughly about similar, like, review scores as the original Bubsy. The Game Boy version was not well reviewed, by the way. J-Spot said, the Game Boy version honestly looks more playable to start careening around the screen like you are in the Super NES version. You would think so, but the controls are terrible. There's a very, very odd momentum in things. Like, I'm letting go. I'm holding the opposite direction. Jumps, you don't really have... You have some vertical movement, but not a whole lot. It's very, very awkward. And they do this very Western developer sort of thing with platformers at the time, where these levels are just giant mazes. You have no idea where you're going half the time. So... Yeah, I will say it's probably a good thing that you aren't moving at speed, because, yeah, otherwise this would be a blurry mess. So it is probably to its benefit that it is as slow as it is. So, Bubsy 2 was an interesting game in the sense of... well, first off, Michael Berlin actually left the company. He left Accolade at this time. Hey, cartridge spoilers. Giant mazes rule. See, acrobat, arrow the up. Very true. Very true. But it doesn't have cool circus music. This game does not have cool circus music, so it can't be as good as Arrow the Acrobat. But yeah, Michael Berlin left, and the people who worked on Bubsy 2 were not fans. Michael Berlin talked about how he apparently went to Accolade's offices just to check on how the game was doing. And saw how they would had Bubsies hanging from the ceiling and whatnot, with pens stabbed in them and whatnot. And needless to say, they just were not fans of making this game, but, you know, reviewed pretty similarly and whatnot. Fractured Furry Tales did not do well. It didn't review well, didn't sell well. Probably because the Jaguar sold, -2 copies. And Bubsy 2 itself apparently didn't sell all that well either. Which was kind of a problem. They ended up having, of course, the Game Boy version. There was going to be a Game Gear version that was going to be based upon the Game Boy version, but that ended up being canceled. And it seemed like Bubsy was in kind of a lot of trouble. So, Accolade decided to make a Hail Mary. They decided that the problem was that they didn't have the original designer on the team anymore. So they went to Michael Berlin and said, hey, would you like to come back to Accolade and make a new Bubsy game? And he said, sure, on one condition. It has to be a 3D platformer. And they went, alright, sure, no problem. So they got started on Bubsy 3D for the PlayStation. Now, this was obviously an ambitious project for 2 reasons. One, well, there was no real 3D platformers at the time. And 2, Accolade had no experience making 3D games in general. And honestly, there's a third reason to that. Since it was for the PlayStation did not come out with an analog controller. Which meant that, and there was no real, dedicated control scheme that had been figured out for platformers at this time, so... needless to say, they had a lot of work cut out for them, figuring out exactly just how they were going to make this game. Why did landing on his head that time work? Huh. Needless to say, though, they decided to jump in there and make it happen. And really, when you think about it, Bubsy 3D is not a bad idea. After all, if this game comes out in any sort of timely fashion, then it's honestly going to be a pioneer. Once again, there's no other 3D platformers out there. And so they carried on, worked on it, And we're getting ready to show it off at the 1996 Winter Consumer Electronics Show that was going to be held in January that year. So January 1996, Michael Berlin comes out to Winter CES, and they being actor Berlin and his team see a little game called Super Mario 64 being showed off. So Berlin sees this and immediately realizes he's in trouble. He sees how polished this game is. He sees how well it controls. He sees how innovative it is. And he also realizes that this game is gonna come out before Bubsy 3D. So he immediately goes back to Accolade and says, hey, listen, we have to delay this game. There is no way this game can come out. But Accolade tells him just straight up, hey, listen, we don't have the money. It has to come out. We have to recoup these costs. So they polish as best they can. And this game comes out in November of 1996. Mario 64 came out in September of 1996. Needless to say, this game did not review well. It was criticized for being a buggy mess, for controlling absolutely terribly, for looking visually awful, and just in general, being an absolute mess of a video game. So, it's really, really unfortunate, because if you think about it, if it came out in, like, let's say, I don't know, June of 1996, it still wouldn't have been a good video game, but at the very least, it probably would have been more well-regarded. Like, people would have understood what it was. I have no idea what direction these frogs are going half the time. You know, it would have been one of the first 3D platformers. It wouldn't have had such an awful comparison to Super Mario 64. Unfortunately, though, that's just not how history works. The game came out, and it was hated. And with that, the Bubsy series died. Accolade would eventually be acquired and would cease to exist as a corporation. And that should be the end of the story for Bubsy. Except it wasn't. Because Accolade is now back as a shell company. And they actually have released 2 Bubsy games since then. One in 2017, the Bubsy game Woolly Strike Back, which is terrible. And the 2019 game, Bubsy Paws on Fire, which is a runner that's made by the former Bit Trip people. So, yeah. The active Bubsy Twitter account, though, has not tweeted since 2020, though. So, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be seeing any more Bubsy anytime soon. And that's the story of Bubsy. Oh, actually, there's one last fact I have on here. It turns out very, very early drafts of this game, it was going to actually be a game based upon Chester the Cheetah of Cheetos fame. But they decided, Accolade decided they didn't want to pay the licensing fees. Yeah, rip Bubsy, rip. We did talk about the cartoon, what could possibly go wrong, which you can't, once again, you can find on YouTube. It's 27 minutes long, because they include hot 90s ads. If you want to learn about Bubble Bath Barbie, you totally can. I honestly suggest watching it. Yeah, it's, as Cartridge Village says, the cartoon is horrible, and yes, it is. It is one of the worst cartoons I've ever seen. It is aggressively terrible. I don't think I want to play any more Bubsy. This game plays terribly. The sound is awful. Visually, it's fine. I think visually it's actually pretty good. But it's, it feels very uninspired. So let's go... Actually, no, before we move on, one last Bubsy 2 fact. Bubsy 2 actually has a sponsorship with Nerf. You can get the Nerf Ballzooka in this. And you could shoot it off and whatnot. Which, that's cool. This game gets... So I only rate games by either if they're good or bad. This game gets a bad. This game gets a 3 A's bad. A very extended bad. So let's move on. Let's move on to another game that honestly is probably more well suited for the Game Boy. And also one that you think I'm going to have nothing to say about. And I totally thought I wasn't going to, but this is WordZap. Also developed by Real Time Associates, oddly enough, and published by Jaleco, released in 1992. WordZap is a weird game, but not for the reasons you think. To start, we should probably talk about what this even is. WordZap is a puzzle game similar to, like, Boggle. Now, you either are tasked with spelling 3, 4, or 5-letter words, and you can only select tiles that are lit up, right? And as you expose more tiles, you can select them. So if I select this P, I can select this I. I can select this I, I can select this F. Obviously, PIF is not a word. PIP is, though. And so the whole idea is to spell different things here. So let's spell pots, right? You know, TIF sadly is not a word. Not enough F's there. Not enough F's. Tag is a word, though. Unfortunately, Wii doesn't work. The Nintendo Wii didn't exist then, and also you can't use proper nouns. Like, all proper Scrabble or Boggle-like games. Actually, has a good similarity with Boggle, I would say. You cannot do that. Unfortunately, Japanese doesn't work, so hi doesn't work. I kind of screwed myself over by by not using those eyes earlier, so we need to use those eyes. We're going to start with Pip. Then we're going to do Cot. Yeah, this soundtrack is very good, I have to say. I do enjoy this soundtrack an awful lot. Tag. Oh, once again, we're running into a problem where we're not using our eyes, though. Oh, but we can do Pip again. We can Pip it up again. Tap. Ha. Give me a hint. No more words found. Oh no. Oh yeah, we could do Pit. Let's do Pit. Yay! See? Round one correct. It's fine. Yeah. And of course you finish. As you get more, you unlock cool pictures, and that's fun. So, this game should be pretty much nothing to say. Like, it's a game that I probably would have hated as a kid if I ended up, like, getting it for Christmas or whatnot. But when you think about it, it's kinda the perfect Game Boy game. It's relatively slow-moving. It's something you can play in bursts. There's nothing here that's gonna really mess the screen up too much, because there's no fast movement or anything like that. It's honestly the ideal game. Like, I would actually love, as an adult, to have this for my Game Boy. Debug says, can't believe ARF is real. Yeah, I didn't expect that one to work either, but I guess, ABBA is kind of the same. I'm not sure about that one, but hey, you know. So, there really shouldn't be much more to say about WordZap. You know, it's just a good game that, you know, came out for the Game Boy, seems perfect for it. And that should be it, right? And you would be wrong. You'd actually be wrong. There's a ton to say about this. So, let's talk about that. So, the Game Boy version was released in 1992, right? And it's the first and only time I know that this game ended up coming out for, there we go. See that? It's like the first and only time that I'm aware of this came out for like either a portable or a console. But this is not the first time that this was released. Apparently, lur's not a word. Give me a hint! That's what I thought. Okay, let's just start over. We'll keep egg, though. So this, previous to this, the WordZap was released as part of the Microsoft Entertainment Pack. Now, the Microsoft Entertainment Pack was a... Let's try to do this, actually. Let's try not to use our A's so much. It was a pack of games that ended up coming out for Windows platforms when they first released in the 90s. And there was 4 of them in total. The first Microsoft Entertainment Pack, actually, is where Minesweeper first came into view. Like, that's the first time Minesweeper ever was part of Windows. Which, obviously Minesweeper. I don't know if... I guess I would call that an important game. I think we could probably safely call that important. Other games such as, like, Chip Challenge and Ski Free were also part of these packs. Games that are kind of considered, like, legendary as part of the Microsoft games that you could just open up the Windows and play, right? Now, WordZap was one of these. It was part of Pack 3, if I remember correctly. Oh, RIP. We can do RIP. There we go. And then lit, and then log. There we go. Now, for one reason or another, WordZap stood out enough to get a release on the Game Boy, and once again, not hard to see why. It seems like it's the perfect game. It's similar to like how Tetris was the perfect packing game. It just makes good use of the Game Boy. Now, the designer behind this game is a man by the name of Michael F.C. Crick. Now, Michael at the time was an engineer at Microsoft, who most people really haven't heard of. Now, I think he's far more important than people give him credit for, though. You see, he has a bit of a claim as being one of the founders of the video game industry. Kind of accidentally. You see, if you know anything about his family, the fact that he's kind of an innovator is not going to be a surprise, because you see, his uncle was responsible for helping develop a way to mass-produce insulin in the 20s. And his father was Francis Crick. You may or may not have heard of Francis Crick. He is a Nobel Prize-winning biologist who is responsible for proving that DNA has a double helix structure, as well as how nucleic acids work. Needless to say, important man. Very important man. So, you know, Michael had a contribution to put towards his family, and he certainly tried to do that. Now, he was, I believe he ended up getting accepted into Harvard. He was going to graduate school for one reason or another for neuroscience when he discovered computers. He knew some friends at MIT and whatnot, and was like, okay, these seem really cool. I want to play around with these. So, that's exactly what he did. I've used all my hints. That sucks. So he ended up dropping out, and he ended up going to work for various companies. Like, he taught himself programming and whatnot. And in 1966, he, as part of one of the companies he worked for, he ended up developing one of the first multiplayer games. A 4-player game called Frogmaster. A game that is confusingly not about frogs, but rather about Stalker. So hey, that's cool. 1966. Like, now, it's not the first game to ever be released. Like, it's not OXO, which I think was like 1958. Or Space War, which was released in 1962. But it's still a very early example of what video games could be. And, even if you're, like, number 4 of, like, games released overall or whatever, that's still pretty darn good. Right? Still very, very impressive, no matter how you look at it. It was a good, successful idea, too. Like, it was a good game. And it ended up getting ports to the Atari 8-bit and Commodore 64 line of computers. So, that's pretty neat. And, so, that ended up coming on out and whatnot, and, did pretty well. But Michael wasn't done there. Michael was not done there. And He ended up going to work shortly after this for IBM. Unfortunately, Ty does not work. Now, he went to work for IBM in the 70s and helped to code some of the first operating systems to ever exist. Yeah, we're kind of in trouble here. My apologies, I'm going to be right back. My apologies about that, just had to make sure the dog was doing okay. And it seems like she is. So yes, where was I? So yeah, he went to go work for IBM, and in the 70s, and he ended up working on some of the first operating systems to ever exist. So, it doesn't really specify. I wasn't able to find out what operating system he necessarily worked on, but from the time frame that he was at IBM, this would be likely to be the CP/M operating system. Sup? Now, CP/M was an acronym for the Control Program/Monitor operating system, which was one of, if not the first operating system to ever exist for what were called microcomputers at the time. Microcomputers being what personal computers are called nowadays. Mainframes were called computers, and eventually they just got mainframe, and then microcomputers eventually became called computers. Now, if you need any sort of idea of what CP/M is, CP/M is essentially a command line operating system like Microsoft DOS. In fact, Microsoft DOS essentially evolves from CP/M. MS-DOS was heavily based upon it. Now, he wasn't done there, because after this, he went to go work for Microsoft in the 80s, and he was a part of the team that coded the first edition of Microsoft Windows. So, you have him working on potentially the first operating system ever that's going to influence MS-DOS. MS-DOS influences Windows. He also happens to work on Windows, which pretty much everybody still uses today in one form or another. Obviously, Windows was made by a team. We can't deny that. But that's still very impressive. That is an impressive legacy to have. In some part, he claimed to be responsible for how modern computers work nowadays. And that's a darn sight better than what I can claim. So, while he was at Microsoft, it was there his game development career really took off. Now, partially, we're just going to start this over because we just are not doing good here. Now, this is partially because he ended up, well, more specifically, Microsoft ended up needing games for their operating system. And he was more than happy to develop those. Turns out he liked developing video games. That was just kind of his thing. So he got to work, making various games for them, such as WordZap. And while he was there, he ended up meeting some very, very important people. Such as Alexei Pachmanov, the inventor of Tetris. And in fact, him and Pachmanov ended up developing a very, very close relationship. Let's go ahead and select another game really quick. Do free play. Let's do 5-letter words. So, the way Pachmanov talks about it is that essentially whenever he had a new puzzle game idea, he would go to him to basically get ideas and suggestions. As he said once, quote, "Anytime that I'm working on a new game and it has the word puzzle in it, then Michael's the first person who comes to mind." And so they would team up for various projects such as Mind Aerobics and other games that would appear on Windows platforms all throughout the 80s and 90s. Though ultimately WordZap was his most important game. It's his best-selling game and whatnot. There we go, Snooper. Hey, we did it. It is kind of like Wordle, isn't it? So he did do various games, and he worked up until about 1998, when after that he ended up shifting to just doing consultant work for various tech companies in the Seattle area. And essentially left the game industry in its entirety after that. Now, I say all this not to say that somehow, like, Michael Crick is as important as, to the industry as somebody like Ralph Baer, the father of video games. But I do think he has an important, albeit immeasurable, impact. You simply can't be working on games that long, release a game in 1966, that ends up eventually getting commercial release, work on 2 major OSs in their infancy, and not have some sort of impact, right? You know, and so I think he's kind of a fascinating guy, and I'm very, very happy I was able to learn about him. So yeah. Seems like a cool guy. I'm beginning to learn that I'm very, very bad at puzzle games like this, by the way. Oh, okay, how are we gonna get to that L? How are we gonna do it? Can't get to that L. But yeah. Good guy overall. I enjoy this game. I must say, this game does seem pretty darn good, all told. There we go. Just relying on chat at this point, because... Give me a hint. Maybe try the word bipod? Alright. Yeah, we'll only play a little bit more of this before we end up moving on. Oh, come on. Coon is definitely a word. I'm absolutely terrible at Scrabble, by the way. If this did not tell you that I wasn't, then let me assure you, I'm terrible at it. Fortunately, I don't think Fram's a word either. Give me a hint. Capper is not a word. I am sorry. What? Okay, I'm sorry. Before we move on, I'm looking up what Kaffir is. Okay, well, you need an extra F. But, according to Google, that's an offensive South American term for Black Africans. Well, I think it's time to move on. I'm sure there's another context where it isn't, you know, racist, but just good job, WordZap. Proud of you. Let's move on to our final game for the day. And this is going to be the Getaway, High Speed 2. A game that when I saw it on the list, I thought it was something entirely different. And it turns out, no, actually. It's a pinball game. A pinball game by the aptly named Unexpected Development and published by Williams Entertainment. Warzakan says that apparently it's also a term for an Islamic atheist. Or Islam atheist, I should say. Interesting. So yeah, this is a pinball game. Controls exactly how you would expect a pinball game to control. Left on the D-pad controls the left paddle. The A button, which would be the farthest right thing on the Game Boy, controls the right paddle. And the B button is for tilt, or shaking the table. I don't know if there's any tilt sensors. There doesn't appear. There is a tilt sensor in this. Okay, cool. So yeah, it controls basically exactly how you would expect it to. as far as whether or not the pinball physics are a good simulation here, I'm not entirely certain. Great. Three times it went exactly in the hole. That is hilarious to me. There we go. I've never been good at pinball. So I like pinball, but I'm not good at it. Yeah, it seems like the pinball physics are okay. But it's hard for me to say as somebody who's just hasn't played a whole lot of pinball tables and whatnot, particularly this pinball table. So, speaking of, we should probably talk about the Getaway. So, to talk about the Getaway itself is actually not really that memorable. It's a real-life pinball table, and it is called the Getaway 2 High Speed. That is the actual name of the pinball table. It was a pinball table that was released by Williams in 1992. A well-received table. Most publications I've read about agree that it was like a well-designed, probably kind of boring table. Wasn't a whole lot of bells and whistles going on in this one compared to some of other, well, like Williams' other work, like the Addams Family and whatnot. But, you know, people agree that seems nice. Now, it did get flack for its very repetitive music. Music that is actually not represented in this, probably because it's licensed music. You see, they used a sample of the ZZ's pop song, LaGrange, a song that came out in 1973, I believe? It's a song you've almost undoubtedly heard. Almost undoubtedly. If you've watched any movies that somehow involve motorcycles or, like, any sort of car ads, you almost undoubtedly have heard this. But, apparently it's a very, very repetitive loop. So, you know, it ended up coming out and it was relatively, kind of a relatively nothing board. Now, this should be kind of the end of the story here because this is literally the entire game. There's nothing else to talk about with this. But we're going to use that then to we're going to take this opportunity to talk about the publisher of this game, Williams Entertainment. Now, I wasn't expecting to talk about Williams because I could have swore that they had released a lot more games for the Game Boy. And I wasn't wrong. They did for the Game Boy Color, which we're not going to be playing any Game Boy Color games. For the Game Boy proper, they only released 2 games, this and Mortal Kombat 3. And we're going to have a lot of other things to talk about for when it comes to Mortal Kombat 3, so this seems like the perfect time to talk about them. So, Williams is one of the oldest amusement companies in existence, or I guess, spoiler alert, was in existence. Now, what I mean by an amusement company is an amusement company is a company that focuses on electronic games like skee-ball or slot machines, or in the case of Williams, pinball. Now, Williams got its start in 1943 by a Stanford engineering graduate by the name of Harry Williams. Now, good old Harry had been making pinball machines since 1933, and he's kind of a big deal when it comes to pinball. You can kind of think of him as like the father of like modern pinball. And he is responsible for a lot of different innovations while he worked on these pinball machines over 10 years for various companies like Amusement Manufacturing and Exhibit Supply. These include things such as the tilt sensor. The tilt sensor is there so you can't just pick up the machine and literally tilt it to make the ball go where you want it to. So you have to be like very, very careful of how you move a machine around to manipulate the ball, lest you end up losing that ball, having the machine lock up. And also like other like more simple things like, hey, you get a high score so you get a free play, a free ball to play with. I'm just doing terribly at this. Well. So, yeah. He did that. He did a bunch of other innovations as well that honestly could take its whole podcast to like talk about. We would just be talking about the early history of pinball if we did that. So we'll go ahead and move on for that. And just kind of caveat this by saying, needless to say, influential. Very influential man. So, Williams, the company, had quite a run of success in the 40s, making various pinball and other amusement machines, when in 1948, Williams, the man, decided, kind of had enough. He didn't really want to run it the day-to-day, and so he sold 49% of his stake to a man by the name of Sam Stern. Now, Stern is a very important name in pinball as well. Stern was a Philadelphia distributor who had been involved in pinball sales and other amusement machine sales. His son would later go on to form Stern Pinball, which is kind of the only pinball game in town nowadays. So, and his Stern family just in general has a good legacy with pinball. So, like, there's been a Stern company that's been around in various ways all throughout the years. Yeah, essentially. There's technically a big three, but we'll talk about that third one later. So, Williams sold his stake, and eventually Stern, bought out the rest of Williams' stake. Williams the man, once again. Now, Williams did stay on board after he completely sold his stake to Sam Stern, and actually continued to make games for them up until 1977 with his final machine, the Western-themed Rancho, coming out. After 1977, he ended up dropping out, which would be a good 34 years of making various amusement machines. So, good on him. Very, very good career. Now, this obviously wasn't the end of Williams, the company. Now, Stern eventually decided that he also had enough of the pinball business, and he decided to sell his company, well, now his company, Williams, to another company called Consolidated Sunray in 1961. Now, kind of an odd name. Oh, my apologies. That was 1959 that he sold the company to Consolidated Sunray. Consolidated Sunray, by the way, was a company in New York that basically ran various amusement parlors and drugstores and a bunch of other stuff. Why they were called Consolidated Sunray, I don't know. I did not look that up. Really should have, because that is a strange name. Now, in 1961, he kind of got buyer's remorse, and he bought back his stake from Consolidated Sunray. That being said, that buyer's remorse didn't last long, and in 1964, he sold his stock again to the Seabird Corporation, a company that at that point was best known for selling jukeboxes. Making and selling jukeboxes. There's a non-zero chance you've probably seen a Seabird machine actually around. That's probably not as likely, but if you've watched any movie from the 80s, or any movie that has any sort of 50s nostalgia, you probably have seen a replica of a Seabird machine at the very least. So, Stern actually did remain with Williams to run the day-to-day operations of the now renamed Williams Electronics. But that didn't last too long, because eventually he was supplanted by a man by the name of Louis Nicastro. Now, Louis is eventually going to become the CEO of Williams. And while I don't know too much about Nicastro's personal history, I know that he's going to remain the CEO at Williams until 2001. And he becomes CEO at Williams in 1968. So he's around for a while. And for good reasons, because he's going to build Williams up to be a pretty big company, pretty big entertainment company with stakes in hotels and whatnot eventually. Now, how exactly he got there is, first off, the pinball business just kept going along. The amusement game business was doing well. And in the 1970s, he happened to see a little game that Atari put out called Pong. Simple little paddle game that was all the rage back in the late 70s. So he saw that, and he decided that video games were going to be the next big thing in amusement. And he wasn't wrong. You can't fault the man for that one. Turns out he was right. So, what they did is that they decided to make their own game. A game called Paddleball. Paddleball is just Pong. It is literally a Pong clone. There is nothing about it that is notably different from Pong. It is literally just Pong. Now, in 1980, he actually manages to amass enough money, by the way, Nicastro does, to just buy Williams outright for the Seaberg Corporation. And Seaberg itself ends up being bought out by another company in 1982 and ends up going out of business shortly afterwards. It gets absorbed. So, Williams is now its own separate company. And Nicastro continues this push for more video games. And now they start to develop games that are actually original. A game such as Defender, Joust, Robotron 2084, and Sinistar. Classic arcade games. Many such as like Defender that had like major influence. Like Defender was one of the first side-scrolling games. Just to give you an example of just like, you know, important innovations that they did, right? And so Williams was doing very, very well for themselves. And it's continued to go well for them as they ended up getting listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Went public and whatnot, started selling stock, and started to amass enough money that they bought out their other major pinball competitors. Bally Midway, which was one of the major pinball manufacturers ever since, like, from the 60s onward, ended up being bought by Williams in 1988, I believe. Yes, 1988. And with that, they became essentially the only pinball game in town. Oh, we got Multiball. Oh, no. Oh, God, I'm always terrible at Multiball. Sorry, we have to concentrate on Multiball. Okay, we can go back to talking about this. So, 1988 ended up actually being kind of like the high point for Williams. They just bought out the competitor in Bally, and their arcade business was going strong because along with Bally came Midway. Bally had ended up buying out Midway, who was another amusement manufacturer, primarily of arcade games, but apparently they did do some pinball as well. And so they now had like a very strong arcade arm as well, like on top of their already existing arcade arm. So they're just doing very, very well. On top of this, 1988 to 1993 was like the last great pinball boom, where pinball just became inexplicably popular again. And this was largely due to a lot of innovations in the field. A lot of like new bells and whistles and just very complex boards, such as the Addams Family, Star Trek: The Next Generation, among others, ended up coming out. Black Knight 2000, which is a hell of a pinball table, all came out during this period. And so they ended up having like incredible sales. Like, once again, they started their own hotel chain. They ended up selling to a profit to Wyndham Resorts in, I think, 1995. In fact, it actually was a separately publicly traded company at the time. Orange Can says, Black Knight 2000 has a banger theme. You are absolutely correct. It is so good. It is so good. Unfortunately, though, the good times couldn't last forever. And after 1993, arcades, both video games and pinball, began their decline, right? And Williams started to feel the pressure from that. Now, Midway had been operating as its own separate entity for a while. As far as like developing video games, they basically shifted all the video game development over to Midway and just had them handle that. But due to these budgetary pressures, in 1998, they just spanned them off as their own company. Because like, arcade games are not working out. This is not going to work out for us. We're going to let Midway go, cut cost, just do this. And just concentrate on pinball. Concentrate on our bread and butter. Now, this worked out great for Midway, who they themselves will one day become the largest North American publisher of video games. For admittedly an incredibly brief moment, because in the 2000s, being the biggest North American video game publisher was actually a death sentence, but that's a story for another time. So that ends up happening, and they decide they're going to double down on pinball. And in 1999, they release a series of tables under the new Pinball 2000 label. Now, the Pinball 2000 label The whole idea behind it was we are going to do integrated computer graphics with all our pinball tables nowadays. We're going to put so many bells and whistles in there. We're going to make them just absolute visual spectacles and just get everybody excited about pinball again. And to be fair, these machines did look pretty impressive. The bad news is that at the end of the day, they were still pinball, except now the machines were even more expensive to make. Turns out when you do nice integrated computer graphics to pinball machines, you make them very expensive. It was the same problem that a lot of arcade games at the time were starting to feel, where it was very expensive to essentially do like a PlayStation 2 in every machine. It doesn't become feasible after a while. So, they released a couple of boards. Had, I think, 7 others in development that ultimately ended up being canceled after their themed board, Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, came out and was an abysmal failure. It just did not do well. Sold something like, I think, 3,000 tables, which was unsustainable. Absolutely unsustainable for how much money they were putting in for it. And with that failure, though, on October 25th, 1999, Williams, who, if you go all the way back to their founder, Harry Williams, in 1933, shuttered their pinball division for good. An impressive legacy, a nearly 66-year legacy of pinball, now all of a sudden gone. Now, if you feel sad for Williams, don't. Because, to be honest, they're actually going to just shift to making slot machines. And that's going to actually go very well for them. After they start doing slot machines, they're going to start recording profits in excess of $600 billion a year. They say 600 billion. That's incorrect. 600 million. 600 billion would be insane. That'd be insane. Point is, though, they started making a lot of money. And that worked out really, really well for them. It worked out well that eventually they were given an offer by various other amusement companies, including one by the name of Scientific Games in 2013. And in 2013, Scientific Games bought them out for a cool $1.5 billion, or I think about $22 per share, or something like that. So all the investors made some pretty good bank off of that. And while Williams still existed as an entity for a little bit, about a year or two later after the acquisition, they ended up being formally absorbed into Scientific Games as a brand. They ceased existence as a separate company and were delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. And with that, they ended up ceasing to exist. So yeah. Williams, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore beyond being a brand name. Alongside Bally, actually. Because Scientific Games owns Bally as well. And that's the kind of the short and dirty history of Williams Entertainment. From being one of the largest publishers of video games, the top pinball manufacturer, to just in a few short years, pivoting out of I guess you could call it the traditional arcade amusement scene entirely. It's kind of a sad story, but that's just sort of the nature of how these things happen. Especially if you're a company that focused solely on the arcades. When those arcades crashed, they crashed very hard. I've concluded that this is not a good game, by the way, during our time playing this. And I don't know if it's because this is necessarily a bad board, or if it's because of bad physics. Probably kind of both, really. Also, this music is incredibly repetitive, so I think we're probably going to stop here. Oh, it should be mentioned, yeah, the Getaway actually ended up being released as part of the Pinball Arcade, which is a modern, like a modern 3D adaptation of pinball tables. That is very, very well done. It's well regarded for its physics being incredibly accurate. I don't know if it's still listed. I know a lot of those games ended up being delisted, and this one might have been because it did use licensed music. Pinball Arcade is dead. Well, there's your answer there. You cannot play this anymore. That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. So yeah, let's just go ahead and pause that. Ooh. We played a lot of Game Boy games with bad music today, between this and Bubsy. But I think that's going to do it for us today. So we ended up getting quite a few good games here, I'd say. I think out of all of these, we ended up having 2 good games. We had WordZap and All-Star Baseball. I think All-Star Baseball is a perfectly fine baseball game. And we ended up having 2 bad games, so not bad all told. Worms Can mentions there's a different company that took the reins of digital creations for tables. Interesting. Zen Studio, that sounds very familiar. But yeah, hopefully y'all learned some interesting things from this. I certainly did appreciate throwing this together for everybody. And I think that is going to do it for us today. Now, next time, we are going to have a fun little selection of games. We're still going to have another sports game, because it's impossible to avoid having sports games, apparently. There really weren't that many sports games released for the Game Boy, but just somehow we ended up getting a large amount listed right at the start. But next time, we are going to play Titus the Fox, Kirby's Dream Land, our first marquee game, I would say. Probably our first game that's actually like really well known. Assuming you don't think Yoshi's Cookie is well known, which Jeopardy Sports Edition, and Roger Clemens MVP Baseball. But that will be for next time, everybody. So I do appreciate you all coming and hanging out with us today. And hopefully we'll see you all next week, next Thursday, unless we get preempted again. Hopefully that won't be the case. But with that, take care, everybody.